So this is the beginning of basically a course that I've been wanting to do for the past month. It's called the Hero's Journey, and the purpose of the course, I guess you could say, is to firstly show how human perception is relevant and how it's not arbitrary or not grounded in fact, but how it actually is purposeful, functional, and useful and truthful and necessary actually for understanding ourselves and for understanding the world. And then I want to show the two main pathways that are laid out commonly in narrative form in sources like religion and mythology and literacy and things of that nature. And then I want to connect all of that to Christ in the Gospels, the hero to Christ, and the adversary to Satan. And so I'll start off with this. I think most people will be able to understand this, or they already know this, that in the modern day, people are more concerned with, let's say, the properties of matter, um, than they are with what matters. Now, um, I don't say that. Let's say I don't say that as if it's completely true, because it's what matters is necessary to see matter, but at the very least, we focus on the properties of matter more than, let's say, 500 plus years ago. And that's largely due to the fact that we've discovered things about the property of matter. Now, let's say in the ancient times, let's say 1500s and before that, there was a sort of let's see, like movement to understand the material world, but it's not the same as the way that we view the material world, and it's not the same way that we investigate the material world even. And surprisingly, they got a lot right actually without modern technology, but it was still more congruent with the idea of meaning and like an adventure back then into the material world. It wasn't in order to just discover how matter works. It wasn't just that. It wasn't limited to that. It was more than that, and it was way deeper and way more profound than that. It was the hero's journey, but transformed. It wasn't the hero's journey in terms of just, say, experience and perception. It it expanded into the material domain. Now, why would it expand into the material domain? Well, the idea portrayed in the Gospels is that Christ's death and resurrection was necessary in order to, or well, yes, it was necessary to save the world, but it it was complete, it was whole, it was sufficient to to it was the pattern of the hero ultimately laid out both narratively and historically, and that was sufficient to save the world from their moral sin. And morality isn't this material thing. It's beyond the material. Morality isn't necessarily grounded in the material, although it one definition of the good is that which attains, sustains, and promotes the growth of life. That's portrayed in the Genesis account and the Hebrew Bible. But you can see how the ancient world differed in this regard, because the hero's journey was expanded into the material domain, because one of the things that Christ famously proclaims is, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." And so the presupposition of alchemy and of chemistry and of modern science, a firm and extraordinarily important precondition is that the world is intelligible, and that it is good to know the truth, that it's good to explore the material domain. That's a religious precondition that both alchemy and modern science are predicated upon. And so one of the things that's um, implicit within the Genesis creation account, both of them, is that the world was not brought about through a random, chaotic, let's see, unorganized, non-functional process over, let's say billions of years. The idea laid out in the Genesis account is that the world was made purposefully, intentfully, and that it is inherently good and intelligible. And so that goes to the material domain as well. The material world is intelligible, it's good, it contains within it the truth, and that truth, when extracted out, will set you free. Those are all um, biblical axioms, let's say. They're all religious axioms fundamentally. And so you might say, well, if the material world is true, and it can be known, and it's good to know that, can you move in the world in accordance with those facts? Now the answer is yes, to a degree, but you see the problem is that you have this array of facts, but you cannot organize them. You cannot choose which one to orient yourself with without choosing it. And that choice requires human perception. And so there's nothing arbitrary about human perception, because in order for science to take place, you need human perception. To use an example, if you were to let's say get a fact, and you were to form a hypothesis based off that fact, well, in order for you to explore that hypothesis and to test it, you have to temporarily sacrifice or set aside all other facts. So you can't, and this isn't even possible. It's not possible to take the whole array of scientific fact and to orient your every single move in accordance with all of those facts simultaneously. It's simply not possible. You have to put those facts in a hierarchy. And so then you say, well, is human perception arbitrary? Is it not grounded in fact? Is it not necessary? Is it a hindrance to understanding truth, scientific truth? And I would say no, because it's required firstly to obtain that scientific truth, but it's also required to further explore it. It's required to use it. Every time you speak, you choose to say something, instead of something else. There's many other things that I could be saying right after this. I could form completely inherent sentences, but I don't do that. I sacrifice other ideas in order to speak with you, in order to tell you this. And that requires me to make a hierarchy of value. And so you might say, is there any truth to that hierarchy of value? And I would say, yes, there's truth to it, but the truth isn't, it's not in the material. And then you say, well, is it a lesser truth or is it a greater truth? And I would say it's a greater truth because it's the truth that allows you to orient yourself from the world and that allows you to use scientific truth. So without the spiritual truth, the material truth has no bearing on our lives. And so in that sense, the spiritual truth, human perception, consciousness is beyond the material array of facts, because it's the truth that allows you to organize those facts and orient yourself in the world in accordance with those facts. Now, now I'm going to go into human perception a little bit. So, how do we see the world? Well, to start off with, I'd like to say, and I'm going to explain this. Whenever I first heard this, I didn't really understand it, but the a description of the structure through which you see the world. So a description of human perception, is a story. So what does that mean? What is human perception? Well, I like to use my water bottle as an example. This water bottle, has material properties. It's metal, and there's water inside. There's H2O inside. But I don't see it as metal, and I don't see it as H2O inside. I see it as a container that contains within it the substance that quenches my thirst. That's what I see. And I see that first. So you don't see the material properties of an object first. You see its meaning first, its relevance first. Um, and the material truth of its existence, let's say, is secondary. Now, you might say, well, that doesn't make any sense, and it shouldn't be that way. But if let's say I were to be walking on a mountain, and I were to unknowingly walk right up to the edge of a cliff. If I were to go, oh hey, look, this cliff is made of dirt and there's roots in it and they're made of this thing, I would fall off. But that's not what happens. What happens is I go to the edge of the cliff and I see, oh, that's a falling off place. That's a place where I can die. And so I see that first, I see the meaning first, and that allows me to act. And so in that sense, human perception, seeing the meaning of something, is more important than seeing its material reality, let's say. It's a secondary truth. It's a secondary um its material existence is secondary to its meaningful existence. Um, and so how do we see objects fundamentally? Well, we assign meaning to things in accordance with a goal. So, if my goal was to quench my thirst, let's say I'm thirsty, and if my goal was to quench my thirst, this water bottle is a pathway that's going to allow me to quench that thirst. It's currently full of water. Now, let's say, for example, that I don't want to bring too many objects into this, but let's say like this was blocking my water bottle and I couldn't get around it. Well, this would now be an obstacle. And so Yes, it's a candle, but it's not a candle. It's an obstacle that's preventing me from quenching my thirst. And so again, the material reality of an object is secondary, not primary. And that's extremely important in terms of orienting yourself in the world. And then you could say, well, what's more important, orienting yourself in the world or understanding material truth? Now, again, in order to understand material truth, you have to have a perception. So this is the idea I'm trying to drive home. Material fact has no relevance without a conscious observer. So this is one of the things that I'm I was, but I still am exploring in the Genesis creation account. Is that what exactly is it that existed before the emergence of consciousness? Now, you could say, well, one of the things that existed was the sun still existed. But the problem is that before a conscious observer, the sun wasn't a sun. So if you were to say pre-consciousness, the sun was still the sun, it still existed. It's like, fine, it materially existed, but whatever that means, it means nothing. But what is it that exists? And you say, oh, well, it's a ball of gas. But it's not a ball of gas. It's a collection of atoms. It's a collection of chemicals, of compounds, of molecules, of whatever. It's a collection, it goes all the way up the hierarchy of abstraction into a big ball of gas. But at all those levels, you have to choose at which level the sun exists in accordance with a goal or an aim, and that requires a conscious observer. And so you say, what is it that existed before conscious observers? And the answer is, we have no idea what existed. Because at what level are you going to choose? If you choose anyone, then that choice sacrifices referring to the sun and those other levels of abstraction, and the process by which that's done requires consciousness. And so things at least are irrelevant without consciousness, without human perception. They're at least irrelevant. But I would say they're more than irrelevant. It's like they, functionally speaking, in terms of a goal-directed series of actions or event, material objects that are neither beneficial nor detrimental but are neutral or irrelevant functionally do not exist. And that's quite important to know about human perception. Okay, so there's pathways and there's obstacles. What else is there? Well, and this other thing is actually, I would say, grounded in biological fact. Or to the very least, we have biologically adapted to its existence. And so you might say, well, if what evolution selects for is true, if what evolution selects for is true, then why did evolution select for these two things I'm going to talk about? And the two things are the known and the unknown. So you have things that you know, and then you have things that you don't know. And that's how the world's divided up. Those are two fundamental categories. Everything can be placed in those categories. Now, these two domains need many words to describe them. And so I'm going to explain that. With the known, you have the known, you have explored territory, you have order, you have tradition, you have known fact, you have the masculine, you have you have the order domains of the heavens, the above place, the place of the gods, God's throne, that type of thing. And so all those words kind of get at whatever's there, and so that's the yin. And then you have yang. You have the unknown, what you don't know, what you haven't explored, what you haven't mapped. Chaos, potential for transformation, the feminine. You have the earth, you have the below place, the primordial waters of chaos, the deep, the darkness, and then you have the for like order, tradition, masculine. You have light. You see this dynamic, and the Genesis creation account again. You have heaven and earth, light and darkness, waters above, waters below. Um, and then day 4, you have the sun, moon, and the stars in the sky. Um, and so it's that type of dynamic. And then with day 6, concluding with day 6, you have male, masculine, and female. Now, when I say masculine and then whenever I say feminine, I'm not specifically referring to male and female like in the biological sense. I mean masculine and feminine and the I guess you could say the traditional gender role sense, whatever you want to call that. Um, and so those are the two fundamental elements of experience. They're the constituent elements of experience. And so how do you orient yourself in the world in terms of these two things? Well, you use what you know in order to orient yourself in the world. And
Hey, Trev, do you want to go to Whataburger with me, Mom, and
no
Paul?
thanks.
Sorry to interrupt your video.
It's okay. So this is what's presented in the Genesis creation account, and it is fundamental to the way in which we view the world. Um, and this view, although it's grounded in biological, although we've biologically adapted to its existence, um, in its essence, it's beyond the material. It's beyond matter. Um, it's in the domain of the religious and of the mythological. And so one thing I want to explain, before I really go into, well, no, I'll do this first. So how do you orient yourself in terms of what you know and what you don't know? Well, you already do orient yourself in terms of what you know. That's how you orient yourself. And but you also, again, you orient yourself in terms of a goal. So with everything that you do, everything all of the time that you do is goal oriented. If you didn't have a goal, you wouldn't do anything. And that's really important to know, because what it means is that every time you do something or you did something, you had a goal in mind. And so then you might say, well, if I did something wrong, what was the goal that I had in mind? And it's kind of a terrifying question to ask yourself, but it's an incredibly meaningful question to ask yourself. When I sinned, when I did something wrong, morally wrong, what was it that I was aiming at? And you might say, well, I was aiming toward something good. I thought. I thought I was maybe you knew that you were doing something wrong. That would be like the case of Cain. God comes to him and he says, "This is wrong. Be careful." And Cain goes and he sins anyways. But let's say, I, you know, optimistically speaking, that you were ignorant and you did not know what you were doing. If your goal was good, why were your actions bad? And then so you might say, well, for example, I let's say I was trying to I don't know, correct somebody for doing something wrong, and they wouldn't listen, and I got angry at them, and that anger built up, and then I sinned by being too angry or unrighteously angry, or that anger wasn't oriented properly. But my original intention was good. I wanted to help this person. I wanted to help them make sure that they didn't make the same mistake. But I would say, is the anger that possessed you, is that you? And that's an interesting question to ask. Now, the idea expressed in Genesis chapter 4 is that the beast that is sin isn't you. So whatever it is that you say is you, oh, I was angry, I was happy, I was this, I was that. These emotions or these drives, at least in the negative sense, in Genesis chapter 4, are portrayed as not human. They're beasts. And what God says to Cain is, "Why has thy countenance fallen? And why is thou angry?" Because Cain saw Abel his brother make a sacrifice, and Cain didn't give his best, and Abel succeeded, and Cain didn't. And Cain got jealous, and he got angry, and he got wroth, and his face fell, his countenance fell. And God says, "Why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, shall you not be accepted? But if you don't do well, sin lieth at the door." So sin is portrayed, lieth, crouching at the door like a beast, like a predator ready to attack. But he's behind a door, you see. So you have to behind a door implies that you open the door and let sin in. And it says sin's desire is for you, it desires you, but you should rule over it. And so how do you rule over yourself? And so sin is not you fundamentally. And it also, the same anger that possesses you possesses other people. When other people are angry, you can see that they are angry. Now, maybe their anger manifests itself differently because you are different people psychologically, at least slightly different people psychologically. And so that anger might manifest itself in a different way. But fundamentally speaking, that anger is the same thing. So if that same anger possesses everybody, what makes you think it's you? And so I would say it's not you. And I would say it's not even human. Actually, we know that I believe dogs can get angry, and I've seen that. And so it's not even human. It's beyond human. And so it's like a spirit, the spirit of anger. And it like it possesses you, right? It takes over, it rules over you if you open the door and if you allow it to. And so these desires, anger, lust, greed, all of these things are sort of like they're spirits, they're demons, they're heavenly in the sense that they're not you, they're not just human, they're beyond human, they possess humans and animals, and they have a goal. And that goal likely doesn't have your best interests in mind. Now, if it's something like the spirit of love or the spirit of truth, then that will have your best interests in mind. But things like lust and greed, those spirits have a goal in mind, and they are going to use you as their way of achieving that goal, whether you understand that or not. And so what you have to do with these desires is you have to orient them towards a higher order goal that you have established. And so fundamentally what we see is we see our current mode of being, at least to a degree we understand who we are. We don't fully understand who we are, not even close, especially in the modern day. And even for me, I don't fully understand who I am. But we understand ourselves enough in order to act and to act relatively properly. And so we see ourselves as we are, but we also see what could be. We see who we could be. We see a a environment that we live in. We see the people around us, and we see ourselves in terms of our mode of being or in terms of our knowledge or whatever it may be. We see a better version of ourselves, and we act in accordance with that ideal. And so in the Cain and Abel narrative, when Cain kills Abel, yes, he kills his brother, but he does more than that. I think he kills his ideal. I think he kills who he could be in the positive upward spiraling sense, because he sees someone doing better than him because they acted better than him, and he kills them. And you think, well, why would he do that? Well, he was jealous. He didn't get what he wanted, but in so killing, his example or potential example, he kills his future self. He kills his ideal, and therefore he's lost wandering in the wilderness. And of course he is, because he has no goal. And so if you have no goal, if your frame of perception collapses, you go into the desert. You wander in the wilderness for 40 years. And of course that's true. Because and there's a quote, a man who hesitates is lost. And so hesitation, you can kind of think of it's like the second guessing of an end, of a goal. It's like, well, I don't know if this is correct. And it's like, bam, immediately you're lost, because you aren't fully dedicated to a path. And when you lose that complete dedication, then you get thrown into the wilderness. And we'll talk about this in a deeper sense later in another lecture. So now that we've established the frame of perception, what is, what could be, and then I forgot to add the series of actions required to transform one into the other. So there's this three-part thing, and those what is, those actions, and what could be is all embedded in the known. It's all embedded in what you know, and then outside of that's the unknown. So that's the complete frame of perception, at least in a fundamental sense. One of the things that I see sometimes, and I don't see this only in an atheist or agnostics or those sorts that would say aren't explicitly religious in what they claim they believe. I also see this in some self-proclaimed Christians. They look at something like the Bible, for example. They see the stories in the Old Testament, particularly the first stories like Adam and Eve in the garden and during the fall, and they see them as literal history. And in some cases, that's fine and acceptable, but you shouldn't prioritize the historical narrative aspect of literature, because if you do that, then in the religious, mythological, and fairy tale like texts, you lose the meaning that's being portrayed. And so if you were to go and read a fairy tale like, the Brothers Grimm version of Snow White, not the Disney version, and you read that, you think, okay, well, that's an interesting story. I don't know if it actually happened, but whatever. Maybe that happened, maybe that not. Well, it's like, no, that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is to show somebody acting out a series of behaviors in order for you to embrace yourself in that character, envision yourself in that character, and decide whether or not that's you now and whether or not that's who you should be. And so, in that sense, that's why we see narratives about heroes, people who go and they save a people and they do something righteous. And we also see the adversary, the person who's in contradiction to the hero, who's trying to undermine him and prevent him from saving the town or the village. And we have these two fundamental paths, and sometimes they mix. Sometimes the hero makes a mistake, or sometimes maybe the adversary does something good. Of course they can mix, but generally speaking, you have the hero and you have the adversary. And you can ask yourself, well, am I the hero or am I the adversary? And one way that you can figure that out is by looking at narrative, looking at things like religion, mythology, and fairy tale. And so then you could say, well, are those things true? And it depends on what you mean by true, because maybe they're not historically true, and that's possible, but they have this truth element to them, and that they show you a mode of being, whether good or bad. And so they're more than true. They're hyper true. They're beyond conventional scientific truth, because it's the truth that allows you to orient yourself in the world and orient yourself in terms of those scientific truths. And so it supersedes that in that sense. And so I don't think that the mere fact that a story isn't historical narrative, I don't think that makes it not true. I don't think that makes it a lie or false. And I definitely do not think that it should be disregarded because of that. And so we can understand the story of the stories of the Bible in this sense. And of course, you take the Old Testament, most of the Old Testament at least, and you take Christ and the Gospels, and you say, well, these are historical narrative, and it's like, sure, fine, okay, they're historical narrative. You can say that, and maybe it's true, but it misses something, because these stories, they're not just history. They're more than history. They're stories that we can imagine, and we can see these stories, and we can see ourselves in all the characters. And if we see ourselves in a character whose actions lead to his downfall, let's say, then we can say, well, maybe the current mode of being that I am embodying is not the correct one. And that could be true. And then you say, well, I can also see myself in the hero. I can see myself saving the town. And you say, well, am I doing that right now? And maybe you aren't. And then you can say, well, how can I how can I embody the hero? And so fundamentally, how can you embody the hero and how can you embody the adversary? That's what this course is going to be explaining. Okay, so all of this begs the question. Okay, all of this acting out, um, all of this moving toward a goal, adopting these frames of perception in order to move toward an end or your ideal. And then you say, well, is there something that is ultimate? Right? I mean, we all have our own individual ideals of who we could be, and it's a terrible thing to project your ideal onto someone else because other people aren't you and you're different than other people. I think maybe it was Carl Jung or it was Carl Rogers. Sadly I don't remember who. But he's one I think psychiatrist or a person of that sort once said one of the hardest things for a parent to do or a mother to do is to not project, let's say, not project her ideal onto her children. So to not um, push their children to become what they could have been but didn't become. And I think that is a very difficult thing to do, but I don't think it's limited to just parenting. I think it's expands all throughout the world. And so one of the things that we have to be careful of is trying to make other people who we could have been. And then you say, well, then if our ideals are all different, is there anything objective about an ideal? Is there anything ultimate? Is there anything constant or consistent about an ideal? And that's also what we're going to go into later in this course, but for now, I want to speak of the ultimate ideal, the ultimate aim. And at least in the biblical narrative, the ultimate aim is is something like the kingdom of heaven, or it's the and in the beginning of Genesis, it's the Garden of Eden. And later in Genesis, it's the Promised Land, and throughout the Old Testament, it's the Promised Land. At least that's what it's supposed to be. And then we see in the Book of Revelation, we see the New Jerusalem. The heavens and the earth go away, and there's a kingdom floating in the heavens and in the sky. And that is the ideal paradise. And you might say, well, is that different for everyone? And to a degree it's different, but the kingdom of heaven is the place where everybody is living in perfect union with one another. It isn't the place where people are doing their own thing. It's the place where people are cohabitating, and they're interacting in a positive manner in order to sustain and bring about further improvement to the kingdom of heaven. And so one thing about the Garden of Eden is that the Garden of Eden has a snake. We see that in Genesis chapter 30. And you might say, well, why on earth would the Garden of Eden have a snake? And the reason is because the snake is chaos. It's potential for transformation. And so the snake represents the possibility of further knowledge. And we see that in Genesis chapter 3. The snake brings to the attention of Adam and Eve the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and it's the fruit of knowledge. It's potential for transformation, and of course, it at least temporarily brings about a negative transformation, but it brings about a change nonetheless. And so the snake resembles that chaos, that potential that needs to be properly named and subdued. And so Adam and Eve are together in union, again in union, perfect union, are assigned the role of naming and subduing and having dominion over the earth. And the ideal state of mankind is not, it's oddly, it's not the state where they are fully protected. Now, paradise means walled garden, and the walls are protection, and symbolically they're that order, that masculine order, that tradition I was talking about earlier. They're the yin, and that surrounds the Garden of Eden. And but there's still a snake. There's still enough room in the walls for a snake to sneak in. And you might say, well, why wouldn't the ideal condition of mankind be a state in which there are no snakes that needed to be conquered? To be in a state in which there's no need to fight off evil, to fight off monsters. There's no need to name and subdue and work and sacrifice. There's no need to do any of those things in the ideal state, right? And the problem is that's wrong. In fact, in the story of Abraham, Abraham is called out of comfort into the promised land, into the ideal state. And so you might not say, well, why wasn't Abraham's state where he had all the food that he needed, where he was rich, he was old, he had a wife, he was still living with his parents in his father's house, he had all the food that he needed, all the livestock, he had everything that he needed, and yet he was the one that was called to the kingdom of heaven, to the promised land. And you might say, well, why is that? And the reason being is that the ideal state of mankind is not that of comfort. And you say, well, that's got to be absurd. But when people are comfortable, when they have everything that they wanted, you see this in rich people, they get depressed. They get depressed and they want more. They want something else. It's not enough. It doesn't fulfill them. And you might say, well, why on earth doesn't it fulfill them? They have everything that they need. And the reason is their life doesn't have meaning. Doesn't have meaning. And you need that meaning. And so what in life is meaningful? You say, well, one of the things, or this is a few things, but one category of things is evil and suffering. Those things are meaningful. And you might say, well, they're just illusions of the brain. They're just chemical reactions produced in order to bring about some change or something like that. They're just biological processes. There's no need to pay attention to them. At least there's no need to think of them as being real things. But we treat them as if they're real. And we treat them like they're meaningful. And in that sense, they are meaningful because evil and suffering are sort of like the mechanisms that the body uses to bring about transformation, right? If you're depressed and if you're anxious, that's your body's way of telling you something needs to change. You're doing something wrong, or let's say you lost a loved one and you feel sad. I mean, you lost something, right? And so It's either signaling that something has changed, and it is signaling that, but it's also signaling that something needs to change often. And so you might say, well, is that the ultimate reality, right? Because these evil and suffering things, they have to do with human perception and human orientation. And so again, they're beyond the biological, and they're beyond scientific truth. They orient us, they orient us, and they help us orient us in terms of those truths again, right? And so you might say, is that the ultimate reality? Is there nothing more than evil and suffering? Is that it? But by definition, that which overcomes something else, I'm not, this isn't a might makes right thing, but that which overcomes it, is beyond it, is a higher order, is beyond it, and is the more ultimate reality. And you might say, well, what is it that overcomes evil and suffering? And that's something like love, truth, joy, hope, peace, faith, those type of things, goodness, righteousness, those things, they overcome it. And so, in essence, the hero's journey is the process by which one brings about meaning in his life, and meaning that is beyond that of evil and suffering. And so, looking back, when we see these religious and mythological narratives, one thing is made very clear, and that's that these things are not secondary truths, and they're not just fiction and, just fairy tale, or just mythological or just religious narrative. They aren't that. They're way more than that. They're the stories that are outlining the modes of being that either produces evil and suffering, or that produces goodness, meaning, and hope beyond that of evil and suffering. And that is the ultimate reality. And so fundamentally, that's what I'm going to be discussing for the rest of this course. So I think I'll go ahead and outline it here. Um, this lecture was called Introduction to Meaning. The second lecture is going to be called the Call to Adventure. So I'm going to further discuss the story of Abraham. I'm also going to discuss the Hobbit and that sort of thing. This call to adventure, this beckoning forward, and then after that call to adventure, I'm going to discuss Into the Desert. So I'm going to start discussing the Exodus narrative, where the Israelites leave Egypt and they go into the desert. So after their call out, they go into the wilderness. They're lost. Their frame of perception collapses, and so we're going to discuss that. We're going to discuss hope and faith. I'll be talking likely about the story in the Exodus where Moses sends 12 spies out, and there's 10 that say, nope, there's no way that we can do it, but there's 2 that say, hey, it'll be difficult, but God will allow us to do it. And so that's going to be about hope and faith. Lecture 5 is going to be about potential and transformation. So it's going to be about um, going from the desert state to the promised land, or going from the desert to Mount Sinai, reorganizing the frame of perception in accordance with the new thing that's been learnt, um, or aligning with the new phenomenon that's making itself manifest. Um, Lecture 6 is going to be about the return home, so going back to the original state, or going to a higher state. Um, and then lecture 7 is going to be the eternal pattern of the hero. Um, so I'm going to bring these ideas up into the mythological narrative, and all of that is going to culminate in the last lecture, lecture 8, Christ, the death and resurrection. So that is the course outline. Um, and so I'll see you guys for the next lecture.